Hey, welcome to another Kidmin Training to Go. We're glad you're here with us today. We have a segment with us I think is going to be very helpful to all of us who are in ministry. We're talking about kids and trauma and ministering to kids and trauma. You might think, well, I'm not a licensed therapist and I don't know what to do. And that's why we brought Troy here with us today. We have Troy Renter with us here today. He's going to talk a little bit about how to minister to kids who are dealing with trauma. I'm actually I was the last few days just looking at the kids who are in Israel and dealing with trauma, and parents as well, for that matter. Particularly, we're dealing with kids, but such trauma. But we have kids in our classrooms, and we may not even see it and recognize it that they're dealing with trauma. But we have Troy Renter here with us. Troy is familiar to our network. He used to be a pastor here in our network. He now is a lead pastor in Harlan, Iowa. He's also the Iowa Children's Ministries director, as well as a licensed mental health therapist. So he has his hands in everything. But we are so glad to have you with us, Troy. And so we're going to let you just talk to us about trauma and helping boys and girls and families deal with trauma in the classroom and in life.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Mark. Yeah, it's great to be here. And yes, I do have my hands in a lot of things, I guess, for empty nesters, so I can. But yeah, today I'm gonna give you kind of a bird's eye view of this topic because we could go on for hours just on certain specific things. So today I'm going to just talk a little bit about what is called connections matter. Connections really are what I'm going to be discussing are going to really, if you can picture like three gears put together, and that would be like your community, your brain, and then relationships, and how all three of those interconnect. But also, science and studies have shown that when all three of these are working, how we respond, or even especially in children, respond to trauma. And trauma can take a different, just as we were talking about beforehand, can take a different role from what we're seeing around the world right now in Israel, to different ways that kids deal with it in school, to at their home. So we're going to just take a look at a little bit about how does this work, and what is trauma. Trauma is potentially any traumatic experience. Some of you may have heard of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, where about 65% studies show that people have suffered at least one adverse childhood experience, but as high as 46 have had effects of four or more. And and trauma really can be a lot of different things. Any experience that is overwhelming or threatening. Now, ACEs themselves are narrowed down to about 7 to 9 different things, from violence to parents separating due to divorce, to prison, to drug use in the home, to domestic violence in the home, to child abuse, along those things. So there's a lot of different categories: suicide, different things like that. But trauma is really defined as anything experienced that's overwhelming or threatening to an individual. And trauma is actually very personal. Trauma for one person is going to be a little different from the other. And a lot of it has to do with the way not only our maturity, but also our personal relationships and how healthy those relationships are, and then how we respond to that. And so, a little bit of those things. And like I was been mentioning, supportive relationships can buffer the effects of what trauma might be. So, if a child is, for an example, we'll use a natural disaster. We're all familiar with those. How a child or a person would respond to those, to a natural disaster, if they're being their home destroyed and everything else, those things, how they would handle that in that moment, would be based around not only the relationships around them, the support that's around them, but also the development of where they're at themselves. And so that's why it's, when we're talking about trauma, and sometimes that's why it's hard to recognize, because everybody responds to it differently. Some children respond very aggressively and very outspoken. Others shut down, or cower even. when they're done that, or they just don't respond at all. And we think, and then sometimes we look at that as they're either being defiant, or they're not listening, or they're not engaging, but really there's something else that's going on in a greater sense.
Yeah.
And so I
So
think that's
can I
when we have,
interrupt you there,
yeah,
Troy?
go right ahead.
Just a thought. So in in looking at that idea of trauma, so you have a boy or a girl who maybe acts out in class, and
Hmm.
we think it's a behavior problem, which it is maybe a behavior problem, but
Yep.
the root of it may be rooted in trauma. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it could be. It doesn't have to be, but there's
Oh,
a good
yeah.
chance that it could be.
Okay.
It could be, but it also, we have no idea when the child comes from, what happened at home when they arrived, what
Yeah.
was going on at the household. Um, we almost all of our churches, we've done a lot of bus ministry, so we would pick up kids from various homes. So we don't always know what was happening in that moment when the bus
Right.
pulled up, or the van, and that child comes running out to us. We have no idea. So that's why it's kind of important to start developing these relationships and working from there. And every once in a while, if I look away from the screens, because I'm used to using a PowerPoint when I'm talking about this, so I
Go
apologize
ahead.
for that. But some possible impacts of childhood trauma can be everything from developmental delays to depression, anxiety, and especially in children now, anxiety and depression are the two highest categories. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact percentage, but it's very high. Our kids are dealing with a lot of anxiety and feeling overwhelmed. Um, but as they grow older, and even now, some of our fourth, fifth, and sixth graders are already starting to do things to help self medicate, getting involved in drinking or smoking marijuana, or getting involved. So there's some areas there. And then also, eventually, trauma can lead to other physical illnesses. It's been linked to cancer. It's been linked. So it doesn't, trauma can affect an entire life, a lifetime of a person. And that's why I think it's so important for us to start recognizing it now, getting involved with our kids early, and building those relationships.
Yeah. So a question on that. In in dealing with trauma, would you say, like, for example, since COVID was an introduction of COVID, your definition of trauma included anything that's overwhelming or threatening.
Hmm. Right.
Obviously, COVID was an overwhelming time for the kids, and just the whole idea of threatening. All of them probably knew somebody who passed away from COVID. Um, are we seeing anything trending from this young group of kids that um, behavioral disorders, or even maybe just regression in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, there's already studies being done showing the amount of anxiety, the number of anxiety cases of anxiety in young children is much higher. The number of child abuse cases, literally alone in my own county where I'm at in Iowa, which I'm in a small rural county, almost tripled during COVID. So we're, and that was on average for the entire state, where they were seeing it here in Iowa. So I guarantee you put that nationwide. So kids were starting to see more of those. Also, their relationships were disrupted. They were disconnected. And I think one thing that COVID really showed is that the importance of healthy connections, healthy relationships in a child's life can literally change that. And those connections, like I said, were built, if you picture it, built around that community, and that can be school, church, neighborhood, pulling all those together. Then how that affects their brain, and then those relationships, building those together. Because that's how we respond to trauma then changes. If you kind of picture it, we all need to feel safe, and we need to think how we can learn, but stress pushes us down. And so if you can picture a house, an upstairs and a downstairs, our brain works almost the same way. We have an upstairs and a downstairs brain. And our downstairs is kind of that survival mode brain. When we feel stress, we're pushed down. We feel anxiety or we're depressed. We are pushed down, and we're just moving into that survival mode that we just got to. We're not able to think. We're not able to process, and kids can't learn. So you have a child in your classroom that maybe he's acting up, but maybe there's something happened at home. Maybe mom and dad were in a huge argument as they were running out of the house, and they have no idea if mom or dad were going to be home when they went back. Um, or that's just a simple example of one. So the child's coming into your classroom and now is not normally not interacting or maybe acting up a little bit because their brain has moved into more of a survival mode. They're just wanting to get through and get home for the night. They just knew that they had to leave to be safe, but they also needed to move there. And that's where, and then part of that is when we move through that, as we move upstairs, if you allow the child to calm, and that's where those healthy relationships, knowing your children that come to your church and building those connections help bring that them moving from a survival mode and bringing them into a thinking and learning brain where you can actually be able to connect with them and help them engage. And then they can then read, they can help speed, they can regulate their body, they can build relationships, and it's all built in that setting. And I think that's part of a challenge for us is being able to recognize those moments and maybe what's going on for a child.
Yeah. um, so in developing those healthy connections, I see that that
Yeah.
is being a big element of this, obviously. And as you know, as teachers in the classroom, um, you know, for some of us, you know, we see this child maybe
Right.
once a week, maybe for an hour during that week, but we know something's going on. You know,
Yep.
what does that healthy relationship or healthy connection look like in that
Well, I think
scenario?
part of that is just getting to know the child or taking time to get to know each child, not just what you're wanting to accomplish for the night, but
Right.
maybe taking some time and interacting with them, maybe setting up the way you do your night so that you're able to connect with them on a little bit deeper level or knowing that they're safe,
Yeah.
but also establishing from the get go that if you're in a large group setting or a small group setting, that they're in a safe place, that
Right.
they're in that spot where having those rules, like in our church, we when I arrived, actually at several of our churches we've been at, we arrived and they had endless rules for kids to try to remember. Hey, this is how you're supposed to act. Well, we narrowed it down to just four rules, and we stuck to and those same four rules go from preschool all the way up through our youth, and they're always the same four rules. And the reason why is because we were building those pillars or those walls. If you think of again that house, there's four corners usually to a house, and so if one of those was missing, well, everything else is going to be lopsided. Everything's going to be wobbly. But if you establish that, a child knows that hey, this is a safe place. They're going to keep me safe, and it's also going to be kind of fun. So our rules are basically established. There's no hurts on the inside or out, which means there's no teasing, no bullying. All four of them cover everything. Adults are in charge, so you already set the standard. Now you don't have to tell a child I'm in charge. It's already set there. You don't have to get in that power struggle when they're telling you no, I don't want to do this.
Right.
Okay, let's not argue with them. Let's establish that. And I'll talk a little bit about that and how you can what we call reframing when you have a child like that when we get into it. And then the other one, the other one is we respect everyone and everything, which means everything covers all the property, and we're respecting everyone who's talking, who's done that. A few of our classes, we had some kids that love to chat, and so we integrated in a few of the classrooms literally a talking stick. So during those more quiet small group times, whoever has the talking stick gets to talk. And then when they're ready to share, they just pass it on to the next person. It's really surprising how well kids respond, and they actually love it, and they know the rule. Hey, who's talking? One with the talking stick. Okay,
Yeah.
and they even when they and I'm not saying it's always perfect because it's not, because you're
Right.
dealing with kids that are dealing with trauma or whatever. But it's a great way to integrate something easy into a room that anybody could do. Um, so I have a 63-year-old guy leading um, 8 boys that are wild and crazy. I mean, they're just wound up from the time they arrive till the time they leave. But when they go into their small group time and he's trying to show them how to do the Bible, he laughed about this talking stick thing, And he finally integrated it, and they all take turns reading, they all take turns listening, they all take, and he goes, wow, just them holding this crazy little stick really worked. And it's just something that we can all learn and do.
No, that's great. You know, and I think that's one thing that I think I've heard you talk about the talking stick before, and the
Yep.
four rules, and those are great rules. And I was hoping you were going to mention the rules. You teased us that you had four rules. I think, oh, Troy, you got to tell me the rules.
Yep.
But those are great. I know one thing that I do intentionally every week with the boys that I work with is uh, we have snack. It's a snack time,
Hmm.
but we sit and eat, and that's where our best conversations and talk
Yeah.
oftentimes happen. You know, a lot of times people think that it's unintentional or just having small talk, but reality is it's very guided, and it it is really probably one of the key things to developing relationships with the boys, because it's not something that's written in a curriculum and what you're going to say next. You know,
Right.
it's conversational, and the boys really like it, um, and our leaders like it, and we get to know one another. And you know, it's a 10-minute period of time, but probably um, other than praying with the boys and sharing the word of God with them, that would probably be my one non-negotiable thing to keep there, is that relational
Yeah.
eating time. So
And we do the same thing. We feed all the kids, so when they come, we realize that food insecurity and where we live is a very big need. So we to meet that, and kids cannot, again, if they don't feel safe, they don't feel like needs are met.
right,
And I think that's one thing people need to realize is that all behaviors, good or bad, is basically an unmet need. So if a child's acting out, or even a child's behaving, that's what we all desire. But all behavior is an unmet need by for everyone, an adult or child, but especially in children. So when a child's acting out, it's not as much about them acting out; it's discovering what that need was. For us in our last three churches, no matter, one was a real big church, the other ones were much smaller, or is much smaller than that. Um, we fed everybody, and the reason why is because we had families in our very upscale church, upper middle class to very up to do 1,000 people. They were traveling, they were getting picked up from a sporting event or whatever, and sometimes they were eating maybe a granola bar on their way home because they didn't have time to get from practice to there. So we started supplying food for that, and the same thing for a lot of our bus kids. They weren't getting a meal. So when we started meeting that need and we used that time, all of our leaders sit at tables, and all their conversations about is, what about, how's your day? Kids love that moment. I get asked every week, can you sit at my table? Pastor, I
right.
got to tell you something. And so I take turns, and they all know I'd switch around to different tables, but I get to listen to them about their day. And it literally sets the tone for the whole night.
That's
And
great.
because I'm meeting that unmet need, and then at the same time, because I'm meeting that need, I'm able to, when it does need to be corrected, well, I already have that relationship built. Because, see, our brains all work based off of that, and different relationships help our brain thrive, either through good times or bad. So our brain responds to all is going to be based out of those relationships. So the childhood brain is kind of that foundation, as we talk about developing, in boys ministries or rangers, growing boys to men, and girls, same thing in girls ministries. We're developing children to eventually become adults. We're developing them as disciples in Christ. Well, we also have to establish those relationships, and what is an appropriate relationship. Well, we're modeling that. We've got to model those things, and we can become that for those kids, and that's setting the tone for how they're going to act or respond in our classrooms, or respond to their trauma that's in their life. And we're got to be those trusted adults for that. And I think that's one thing we realize, that because even our brain or a child's brain, it adapts to whatever experiences go on. And so, if a child's in a lot of trauma or dealing with a lot of anxiety, like they had through COVID, separated from their friends, disconnected from their church, during that time, their brain was responding to all those moments and was building those. building shelters around them, or almost like a wall, if you want to look at it. And now, with everything being back open, they're relearning how to have those relationships, how to reconnect. And you got to look at it. We're reestablishing that. And I go, what better safe place to do that is at the church? And I think your snack time is awesome. That is like the easiest thing to do because almost all of us have a snack time. Let's just have a conversation. Let's do those things and be able to and have that happen.
Great, great.
It,
So what else you got for us,
I
Troy? And
think
tell
one
us
of the
how.
things I was talking about as ending is kind of that I mentioned it is about reframing. When you had a child,
Yeah,
that behavior, their child's acting out, and I said all behaviors that is driven by an unmet need, and it's actually driven really more than just an unmet. It's actually a healthy need that they need to have. It's a so when we do that, we need to be able to first recognize that need. We need to be able to discover it, and the only way you can do that is built in that relationship through community. And the church is like the perfect community to for children to not only express themselves, but to be able to do that. And then the children actually see the world differently than you and I. We have to remember that a child does not see the world the same way. So, like you brought up, in Israel going on, how they see war, how they see things is much different from the way how we would see it. They respond to the world much differently than the way we do. We can mark that up for maturity, but we also can mark it up with the fact that our own life experiences allow that. Well, they're still discovering those life experiences. So then a child needs to then another when we're reframing, when we're looking at how do we recognize this, and this all can happen simultaneously. The desire a child needs to know desires to be understood before you know there's something to need. So a child needs to know desires to be understood first. So to recognize that need, that desire is then met. Then you're able then they're able now to listen to what you have to say. If they feel like you're not meeting that need, or they're not meeting that desire, then the fact is that they're not going to listen to you. So then what are they going to do? Their behavior changes. They're responding to the trauma. They're responding to their negativity, and then and what you allow or what you're going to do allows that. And then if they don't feel like they're heard, they're going to make themselves heard. So why not? And so as you're reframing their behaviors, just taking a look at going, okay, child's acting up, Sammy's acting up. What's his unmet need today? Well, he had something he needed to say to me right earlier today, but I didn't have time because I was busy because I got here late. I was trying to set up the classroom and he met it. So what is happening? His unmet need was he didn't get to be heard. He didn't get to share with you what was so important on his heart or at that time. And so now we went from being something simple about him telling you about his new puppy that grandmom and dad bought him. Now has become, well, he's just going to act out because if you don't want to listen, why do I need to listen? It's this as simple as that. I know I'm kind of making this a
yeah,
big example or
right.
a very, but also then our eyes equal to a child ears. So if you're not looking at a child and you're going and you're looking over them or you're not looking into their face, they're believing that you're not listening to them because they're used to it. Especially children in trauma are used to adults not listening to them. They're used to not being heard. And so when you look at them, that brings that connection moment back to it. And then you're able to respond to that need. And so basically, reframing becomes part of rather than seeing a child being boisterous or restless, maybe there you reframe it to being something more positive. There's an unmet need. So what is that unmet need? Well, he wants to be a leader. He desires to be a leader. So why not give them a job? An example of that is we have a student in our that comes to our kids ministry. He acts up. I mean, he's very explosive. We all know that. His twin brother, pure opposite. They're literally identical twins, born minutes apart. You can't tell them apart. I flip their names around all the time. I now figured out how to tell them apart. And basically, it's their behavior is the way. What
Wow.
we've discovered, though, is if we allow him, he feels he wants to be heard, and he feels like in his family he's not heard because he's always in trouble. So he's always being told. So when we listen to him, we give him a job that the whole night changes for him. He not only can answer every question, he participates. He actually worships, and all we're doing is having, hey, can you hand out tonight's snack? Can you hand out the papers for tonight? And we'll get other leaders that, well, is that fair to all the other kids? Well, is it fair to that child also that he has to sit and think that he's not being heard, he's not heard, you know what I mean, he's different from
Yeah.
everyone else? And we have to take fairness out of it. We have to also look at what is the need for every child and meet those, and that can easily be done in every classroom.
Yeah, I believe that, and every child is different,
Yep.
and I think it's learning. You mentioned this right from the beginning is learning who the boys and girls are in our classroom, getting to know them on a more than just surface level.
Right.
Um, Praying for them. One of the things that I was thinking about while you're talking is I think I'm all in on being a healthy connection for the boys and girls that I minister to, and I'm all in for that. But I realize that I can't be there all the time for them, and of course they wouldn't want me to either to be there for them all the time. So the question is, introduce the whole idea of how do we help the child in that in their relationship with God and help them recognize that make that healthy connection to God, that God can help them in their moment of need and where they're at.
I think where that starts out is you establishing that safe parameters, that safe house for them. So when a child enters your classroom or they enter your church, this is a safe place. This is no longer everything that's happening in their world, all their experience or their trauma does not have to play a fact or a role in this moment. They're in a safe moment. You're a safe person, and you're able to model what Christ can do in their life. You're able
Yeah.
then to start speaking into how God can enter that in, and that can be as simple as putting your arm around them, giving them all high fives, recognizing them by name, um, or giving them all nicknames, whatever you need to do to help you remember. But
Right.
it's establishing that relationship so that you can bring God into those moments. And
Right.
then when you're teaching them, they're now listening because you've now just reframed their behavior. You've brought them down to this point. They know you're in charge. They know you're going to keep them safe. They know everybody else is going to have fun. And if someone's acting up, you're going to take care of it. They don't have to intervene. So now they're in a spot where they can actually hear God, listen to God,
Yeah.
and respond to God. And I think that's where if we can establish those classrooms basically in those same four rules. Our last rule, I don't know if I mentioned it, is to have fun. That was our absolute last rule. And our kids, so we make sure every night somewhere there is something that's over the top fun that they all get to do. And for some of them, they don't always consider it fun because that's not what they would do for fun, but it is something different from the rest of the night. And it's just able to establish that because now they know they're in that safe place, and that's what helps them bring it. Because you're right, we only have them for maybe an hour and a half, and for if we're lucky, we get them on Sunday, so maybe we get them for another 2 hours, depending on our service, hour and 15 minutes. So we get them maybe 3 hours out of a day, but when they come into that building and they know this is their safe place, it changes the whole aspect. And then you help them adjust that to the world, giving them, here's how you can do this when you're at home. Here's what you need to do when you're at home, and model that in your classroom. Talking about prayer, teaching them how to pray, but how do they pray even at home? Here's what you need to ask for. Are you struggling? Here's what you do. And be able to do that because God can meet that need.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, Troy, it's been great having you here
yeah,
with us today. If anybody wanted to ask you any questions, you mind if I'll put your email address in the notes? Um,
that that would be
yeah,
great. Yeah, feel
that'd
free.
be great to do that.
Yep.
You know, one thing I recognize that I am not, and sometimes we have children who have they're really struggling with some issues. There a lot of trauma, And one thing I know that I'm not is I'm not, as you are, a licensed mental health therapist. And sometimes we have kids that we need to make a recommendation for their parents. Say, hey, have you thought of somebody? And I think one thing as a pastor I really started to do, and I think this is a tip that I'd have for people, is have a list of help people of helps in your drawer that people have different needs that you're not really ready to handle them or help them with them, but you can point them to them. I
Right.
like to tell people, my biggest help is I like to tell people, let me introduce you to my best friend. He knows how to fix everything. Let me
Yep.
introduce you to Jesus. And
Right.
but there are other people that are his friends as well that can help you through this.
Yep.
And so uh, I know that there are kids who are really struggling that need some extra help, and somebody like yourself would be a great resource for that family. And so, as pastors, find out who those people of helps are around them. I don't know if you have any insight on that before we leave.
Well, yeah, no, even before I became a therapist, that was the reason why I became a therapist. I was trying to help a lot of kids. I was getting a lot of people asking me if I could meet with them, and realizing that I didn't have all the skill sets, even though I came up in this field before I became a pastor. I didn't have all the skill sets to meet those needs. And even today, I don't feel like I always have the skill sets. And so I think being able to refer out, having that list of people looking in your community, um, to tie that in and be able to reach out to them, that they know they're safe,
Yeah.
and be able to work and get to know them. And I think that's the other thing, Mark, is one other thing that leaders could do, especially full-time pastors, is asking their church can go and volunteer at their local elementary school or their elementary schools. Me and my wife Brenda, my wife now works at the high school, but when we were strictly youth and children's pastors, we volunteered at all of the high schools. We went into every one of them, every elementary school. We got to know the people, and the kids saw us there. That just brought one more safe person that could bring in their life. And we of course we were doing part of it to help grow our ministry, but the other part was that the kids knew, hey, they saw us outside of this church building, and that
Oh,
we're
great,
safe. And so I think it's a great way of getting involved in your community,
great.
and that's how you get to know therapists, get to know student kids counselors. And so I even have student counselors that from the school that call me now, and even before I was a therapist, calling me, hey, can you, I have a child, can you come and see him, can you meet with him, or can you just talk with them today? They're just having a hard time, and I stop in when I can. Some days I can, some days I can't, and but when I can, I stop in, and that's all because I built that relationship.
No, that's great. Great, some great resources and great tools for us. This was been on my heart to talk to our pastors and children's leaders about children and trauma. It's something that our kids are dealing with, and so thanks, Troy, for being with us here today.
No problem.
Thanks,
Thank you.
thanks for those of you that participated. I think you've found a few things that would be very helpful to you. We'll continue to offer these Kidmin Training to Go sessions, and if you have anything that you would like to recommend, let us know. We'd love to hear what you would like to have some Kidmin training to go for. Thanks again, Troy. God bless you.
Thank you.